Hello, everybody. How are you doing on this fine Tuesday? I'm doing quite well. Long time no talk. It's been an especially long time since I have actually done a pre-recorded video, which is what this video is going to be today. So as you can tell from the thumbnail title, scrolly banner below, today's video, I'm going to be giving my commentary and reactions to the recent 4-part docuseries that came out on HBO Max, one of those streaming services. Y'all know, every single one got about 15, so one of them, but I think it was actually put on in connection with Investigation Discovery, which is kind of like a true crime channel or whatever. So this 4-part docuseries, I did have some indication that it was going to be coming out because I do follow Alexa Nicholas and Leon Frierson, who are both former child actors, child stars in the Nickelodeon circuit. Leon goes by Leeboy TV, and he's pretty active on Instagram. And also Alexa Nicholas, she's active on Instagram and also has a YouTube channel. And I actually mentioned Alexa recently in my Scientology video on BJ Investigates. She was one of the first people, actually the first person I saw doing any Scientology protests. So one of the things that, I don't want to speak for, y'all go check our channel out. I encourage you to do so. But one of the things that really has motivated Alexa to be an activist, to go to these protests and stuff like that, is the experience that she had as a child on set of a Nickelodeon show. The one that she was on was called Zoe 101, and that one did have Jamie Lynn Spears, who is Britney Spears' sister, as the star of that show. Well, this 4-part docuseries did come out yesterday and the day before. It was like 2 episodes were released each day. And last night at 9 p.m. Eastern, the second 2 of the 4 total episodes did come out. Now, some clips from the documentary or from the docuseries had already surfaced. In particular, a clip of Drake Bell, another former child star, coming out and basically saying that he was the John Doe, the anonymous abuse victim who was abused by one of the producers. In particular, it was a dialect coach on the show, but I think to call him a dialect coach, his name's Brian Peck. I think to call Brian Peck just merely a dialect coach is underselling the level of insidious, active, intentional involvement that the man did have in not only the show, but also Drake's life. So I did kind of know that this documentary was coming. I knew that something was going to be on the horizon, but as y'all know, I've been in India. I've been a little bit out of the loop as far as making content and stuff like that. So I actually watched all 4 episodes yesterday. I watched the first 2 before the second 2 were released, and then I waited a couple hours, and then the second 2 were released, and I watched those last night as well. And I do have some notes here I want to kind of go through because I want to make sure I don't miss anything. Okay, so it is 4 1-hour-long episodes, so obviously there's going to be tons of stuff that happened, that was mentioned, that was talked about. I'm not going to be able to cover here. So I would encourage you to go and watch it fully for yourself and form your own opinions. This is just my commentary and reaction. I was not there. I have no insider information. I have no insider knowledge. I know as much as y'all do, so I'm just talking about my opinion. So they went over a lot of stuff that we already kind of knew. And we already knew this stuff because thank God people on YouTube have been making videos about this for years. And I got to give a shout out right here, right now to Sloan. It doesn't matter what you think about Sloan one way or the other. The fact is, I don't think there's been a single person on YouTube who has done more and who has gotten more eyes on this story than Sloan. So shout out to Sloan. Because of Sloan, most of the information that this docuseries had in it, as far as these revelations, I had already. Thank you. It's drying. Thank you. And not only did Sloan do his own coverage, but also Sloan has formed obviously a friendship with Alexa Nicholas, who is one of the children actors who's now an adult. Sloan has had Alexa on his channel. Sloan has had her on his podcast, and it seems that he's been very supportive of this sort of Eat Predators movement, which seems to have stemmed from the abuses that the children faced by the likes of Dan Schneider and Brian Peck and all them, allegedly, according to them. So because of Sloan, because of Alexa, because of Leon, who I also personally have met whenever I went to the Amanda Bynes conservatorship hearing, they have made it very known and very public a lot of the abuses that they did face. So I kind of knew a lot of this stuff, and they went over a lot of this stuff on the docuseries that we already did know. And I'm glad they did it because it was egregious stuff that does need to be seen by even a wider, larger audience than even just YouTube. Some of the things that they covered were how Dan Schneider specifically was obsessed with feet. And there's a little cameo of me in there, a little clip of me. So they talked about the feet, which that's where they kind of put in my little cameo. They talked about the kind of suggestive nature of some of this slime, some of these squirt, face moments, other suggestive jokes they mentioned. One of the things that they focused on a lot was that they had given Amanda Bynes a character whose name was Penelope Taint. And they spelled taint differently, but taint is a colloquialism for an anatomical area of the human body between the testes and the anus. And, there's writers on the show saying, yeah, we knew exactly what that was. And we all allowed it to move forward and go forward. And when Nickelodeon came in and asked Dan Schneider about it, he basically lied and gaslit Nickelodeon, which I'll get into my opinion on what I think this whole thing is a push for in a minute, but I don't want to taint it, no pun intended, this early on. They also discussed the lawsuit and the prison sentence for Brian Peck. He had been found guilty of some heinous crimes against a child or some heinous actions against a child, and he was sentenced to prison. They talked about that, and just generally Dan Schneider being a weird freak. But they also told some stuff that hasn't been talked about quite as much, if at all. As I mentioned earlier, Drake Bell, one of the very, very famous child stars of the time, did come out and admit that it was him who was the child victim of Brian Peck. We had a lot of other stars, former child stars who are now adults, coming out and telling their stories, some of them for the first time. Kyle Sullivan was one such actor who was on The Amanda Show. And he talked about a skit that he had done. And I actually remembered this skit. Some of the skits I remembered, and some of them either I just never saw them or I got memory wiped or I trauma erased the shit from my memory. But this particular skit that Kyle Sullivan talked about was called Coffee and Sugar. Kyle Sullivan talked about this skit that he had done, and he talked about how as an adult and as time has passed, he's really been able to kind of re-examine this skit in particular. And the way that they had the skit set up was there was a huge vat of coffee and a huge vat of sugar. And we're told that it was actually real sugar and it was real coffee. And so they basically have these kids consuming what amounts to be legitimately drugs, at least from the caffeine. And both of the former child stars who recounted this scene did talk about just how physically taxing it was. It was like actually physical labor. It was very difficult to put their bodies through that. And then Kyle pointed something out that I didn't really remember. And it was that pouring all of this sugar in your mouth causes this like viscous substance to form in your mouth. And it's disgusting. And they left that in, it was just nasty. So there were quite a few stories that the former child stars on these shows did come out and share, but I really want to mention two more. I must have seen this when it came out. I must have seen it when it came out because I loved Amanda's show. I loved all that. I was watching these episodes, but again, seeing it again as an adult, knowing what we know now today, it was just so unbelievably mind-blowing and blatant what they did. Leon, Leeboy TV on Instagram, he was on the documentary and he did a great job. And I do applaud him and Alexa and Brian and Giovanni and all of the other folks who came out and told their stories. I really am thankful that they did that because someone has to tell the stories. Someone has to tell how it actually happened because as y'all see, they will try and rewrite history. So I appreciate them coming out and sharing these stories of humiliation and torture that they probably would rather just forget about. So thank y'all for doing that. And anyone on that documentary, you have a platform here. Y'all can come and clear anything up you need to clear up. Say anything you want to add, anything like that. My door is always open. Also did see Melanie was in the documentary on the protests and stuff. Shout out Melanie and Veronica. But anyway, one of the things that I had kind of not remembered at all was a particular skit that they had Leon doing, and they had him playing this character. And again, this is a Black child. And he had said the worst part, or one of the worst parts, I don't want to put words in his mouth, go watch the docuseries, but from my recollection, he basically said the worst part of the whole costumes and all of that situation was just the vulnerability and the level of discomfort that he did feel whenever he was made to wear the superhero costumes. And the superhero costumes obviously are a body leotard and underwear over the top of them with a cape. So in and of itself, that made him uncomfortable. That made him feel exposed. Obviously, that would make sense that he would feel that way. And he said, I was a growing child and it was all just out there on display for the world to see. But then they took it a step further. This is one of those two that I really want to focus on. They put a large prosthetic nose on him, a huge fake nose on his face. And the name of his character, a Black child, was Captain Big Nose. And they made it, they made him, it's like a minstrel show. They were satirizing and caricaturizing Black people and a Black child. And listen, this is not my wheelhouse. All right. This is not my particular lane. I'm not the expert in the country on racism, but even I could see that was so racist and so not even racially coded, way beyond racially coded. Captain Big Nose. And they put a big nose on him. Okay, so that's 2 strikes right there, period, before anything else. Captain Big Nose on the Black child. And then they got him in a leotard that he's admitting now he felt very uncomfortable in. They didn't stop there. They put 2 big noses on his shoulders. And yeah, in a certain light, from a certain angle, it kind of does look like noses. They put these giant fake noses on his shoulders, but when he's facing the front, they look very obviously like male genitalia. So they put the Black child and the Captain Big Nose leotard with basically phalluses on his shoulders, and they don't stop there. Then he sneezes, and when he sneezes, some fluid gets on somebody's face. And yes, Dan Schneider was responsible for that. But the whole entire writer's room also was responsible for that. And anybody that continued working on this set after that moment, I don't care about nothing else. What if that was the only thing that happened? Y'all are telling me exactly who you are by staying working on that set. I have some more to say on that topic, but let me get to this other incident that was recounted by another child actor, Brian Christopher Hearn. So Brian, he comes on, and this is one of those clips that circulated before the docuseries came out. And there was a show on Nickelodeon called On Air Dare. And it basically was like children's Fear Factor. And I do remember also seeing this one. I also remember there being different versions of this show where they would have like kids from the United States, across the United States, who weren't celebrities come on and do weird stuff. And I definitely do remember being grossed out by some of this stuff particularly. But this stunt, this skit, I'm not sure I did see, or if I did see it, I memory wiped myself. But Brian came out and he recounted it, and it sticks with me as just being so heinous. This whole show, the whole On Air Dare situation, the whole show. He comes out and he says, during my most uncomfortable moment, I was actually on stage saying, I don't like this.
On Air Dare, I was saying, I don't like this. And to see that is...
And to voice it.
And to have voiced it.
I don't like this. And to be ignored because, it's funny.
Who was it funny for?
Right.
It wasn't for me.
Again, I'm not putting the clip of this because it's just so nasty. I'm not putting it on here. But they had him come out. They gave him some goggles. And they had him come out with nothing but shorts on. And again, this is more sort of displaying of these children's bodies for really no reason. There's no reason he couldn't have been wearing a t-shirt. No reason he couldn't have been wearing a t-shirt. None. Then they had grown men slathering Brian in peanut butter. And he's shirtless, and they're slathering him and they're touching all over him with a lot of peanut butter, which is nasty and a waste of food. And then they have him lay down, And out comes a number of dogs, I think 3 big old dogs, and they're licking the peanut butter off the child's bare body.
Hearn's dare had him covered in peanut butter and then licked by dogs.
And he's saying, I don't like this. I don't like this. And then, they cut to an interview with him. And in this interview with him, he's saying he didn't know how to get out of it. Like, he says in his own words, I'm paraphrasing, but his own words was he was trying to get his family, quote, out of the hood. He was trying to help his family, adults, siblings, etc., transcend the societal rung into which he was born. And so as a child, he was putting himself in a situation of sexual discomfort, sexual exploitation to help his family. And this brings me to a very important point. If you blink, you might miss it on the point, the nuance I'm about to make here. But in my opinion, my estimation, there is a stark, notable, monumental difference between the kids who were actors on the show and the writers and the producers and the people who were adults at the time working on the show. Because right now, you watch this documentary and it's like kind of like all adults talking. Lest you forget, some of these kids were 11, 12 years old at the time. Okay. So that now I want to get to my next little segment. So that segment was about, what the kids experienced and what the kids at the time they were children went through. A lot of them, there was a lot of them on there. A lot of them came out, said other stories. I'm not going to get into all the stories. Go watch the documentary. But, that's one section. The kids talking about the abuses that they faced. Also, Drake Bell talked about being abused and how it was systematic, how the show and the people working on the show isolated him from his only protective system, which was his father and his mother, and manipulated them and all of that. Then there's another group of people that were talking on the documentary, and they got them all mixed in. It's a little bit confusing. So I just want to make sure we're using a little nuance here. Another group of people that talked on this docuseries were some writers who worked on the show, and also just some producers, executive producers, Virgil, whoever, people that undoubtedly, in my mind, these higher up level people, Virgil, whoever, and all these people undoubtedly had at least some inkling of an idea what was going on. Okay. In my opinion, I don't know. I wasn't there. But there's these 2 writers who, both women, talked about their experience on the show and talked about, how they got the job, how they were paid only half as much as the men were paid, how they experienced abuse, harassment, workplace harassment. One of them actually ended up suing over the harassment and abuse that she faced on the show, which I want to be very clear. I'm very sympathetic to that. Okay. I don't think that should have happened. I don't think it was right. I obviously don't believe that women should be making half of the money that men make if they're doing the same job. I obviously don't believe that. I feel for them for having gone through the situation. It was a little bit of a time's up, a little bit of a Me Too situation. So I am glad to have gotten their perspective and their stories. And I think it's important to document it for the history books. For example, when these women first kind of were being interviewed, one of the things that they spoke about was that they were kind of desperate to get work in Hollywood. And for that reason, they basically accepted positions knowing that they were not making as much money. They knew what the salary was beforehand, and they knew that they were not making as much money as the men. But they were just so desperate to work in Hollywood and stop. One of them, what's her name? Christy Stratton, Hollywood writer. She said, she was temping. She was doing temp work. And it was just so unimaginable for her to go back to doing temp work. She didn't want to do temp work anymore. She wanted to have a Hollywood job. She was desperate. So from how it looks like to me, her and this other lady, they were writers on the shows, Amanda's show, all that, whatever. And they were paid unequally because they were women. They weren't paid as much as the men. But it's important to me to point out, they were adults over the age of 18 at the time, and they were choosing to take that pay. It is illegal for that to have happened. I am not defending it. What I am saying is this is a very big difference to me between the children who were trying to get their family up out the hood and the adult who was just desperate to be a Hollywood writer and just didn't want to go be a waitress or whatever. Okay, that's a big difference to me. But that's just me. That's my opinion. So these two women talked about their experiences. One of them was this pay situation. Another situation, which I won't get into too much details because, again, I'm trying to stay in the good graces over here of the overlords, but she described a horrendous humiliation ritual. I mean, there's really no other way to describe it. That was of a sexual nature where, they would do these writer workshops and act things out, improv. They're probably all comedians. They're all funny, whatever. And at one point, Dan Schneider suggested that she bend over the desk and pretend that she was engaged in a certain act and act out a scene. And at first she was saying, no, I don't want to do that. And, people eventually kind of bullied her, pressured her into doing it. And I feel bad for it. Don't get me wrong. I want to be very clear. I'm sympathetic to it. Nobody should ever be put in that position in their workplace. That's sick. And I'm glad she told the story because now we have some more insight into the type of person, the type of depravity that is running Dan Schneider's mind. I mean, Rich Lux, he said something so profound one time. He said, money doesn't make people evil. Money, power, fame, that don't make people bad. Money, power allows people to act out and to portray what they actually are. So if it's a good person, they're a good person. They have money and power. If it's not a good person and they're depraved and deranged, like Dan Schneider, in my opinion, then what you see play out is cruel tyranny, Game of Thrones level torture. And so I don't think it's acceptable. I don't think it's okay. I think it's vile, disgusting, and depraved. And I actually support this woman in her journey to healing through the grief of all of that and all of that. I really do. That being said, I was alarmed at how it was portrayed through the documentary and the aftermath of it. Because the producer, whatever, interviewing this woman, Christy Stratton, who had been through all of the situation with the leaning over the table and all that, they ask her, to talk about it, the situation. And she's just, I don't want to talk about it kind of thing. Understandable. No problem. But then she kind of does talk a little bit about it. And the interviewer asks her how she feels about it, or something like that. And she says she just feels so bad and sorry for that young writer, for that young woman. And to be honest, I do too. I don't not feel sorry for her. But that's where kind of like started crumbling apart for me because I've been in pretty analogous situation early on in my career. I had spent a lot of time, effort, and energy to become a lawyer. I had taken the bar exam. I had put myself through it. I was desperate financially to pay off my student loans. I was desperate in my career. It was the thing that I was supposed to do with my life. And some unethical shit was going on. I was being asked to do stuff that I was very uncomfortable with. So I quit. I am not a person who has not put my money where my mouth is. I have waited tables and I will do it again. Before I'm working on a set where I got to bend over and pretend to be engaged in a sexual act and act out a scene in front of people just for someone's shits and giggles. Now that's a totally separate issue from the fact that these two writers also admitted that they knew the children on the set were not being treated appropriately. They knew the other writer, again, I don't want to drag her quite as much because she did end up doing something about it. She quit at a certain point. She sued for it. She didn't know what was going on after she quit. What could she do about it? But this other lady, Christy Stratton,
working for Dan was like being in an abusive relationship.
She was just too scared to go back to doing temp work. So she allowed herself to be publicly humiliated. And I'm not saying that I wouldn't be in a position where I felt pressure to do it in the moment. I'm not even blaming or holding her responsible for that. I'm not saying she shouldn't have done it in the moment. She should have caused a big scene. I'm saying at some point that should have made her reconsider her career choice. She was telling us that money and her desperation to be a part of Hollywood was more important than her dignity. Hello? This ain't victim blaming. No, it's not. I feel for her. She shouldn't have been put in that position. She should never have been put in a position to have to choose her career or her dignity, but she was. And it shows me what her character is now that that's the decision that she made. Not only that, but children were being abused and she knew about it. This is the example I'll give. The other lady, I don't remember her name, I don't have it pulled up right now. She said she knew, and the writer's room, the whole writer's room knew about this Penelope taint situation. Again, taint is like a private part, basically. And they named little baby Amanda Bynes' character that. And all of the writers in the room knew this is what this lady had said. And apparently Dan Schneider had told them, don't tell the kids. Don't tell the kids. Then they took it a step further, as they do. And there were scenes of this Penelope Taint character in a bed. And there was like a POV camera over the bed, and the little girl's in the bed. She was playing a little girl. She was, in fact, in real life, a little girl. They were making her call herself a private part. Everyone knew that's what it was. It wasn't an accident. And they got her and they're filming her in a bed. And one of these writers said, yeah, we knew. We knew that was what was going on. We knew that's what was going on. All the writers knew. Dan told us not to say anything, and we all felt uncomfortable about it. But y'all didn't feel uncomfortable enough about it to do anything. And some people did make a good point in the documentary. They were saying everybody knew about this. Everybody knew from New York to LA. Who would we tell? Good point. I guess maybe don't tell anybody, but you willingly worked there. You gave your talent. You contributed your talent to this show, knowing what they were doing, admitting now that you knew what they were doing. In all the years that have passed, people have been arrested. People have gone to prison. Have you come out and defended these children who you allowed without doing anything at all to help them to be abused? One woman, she sued the show for, workplace harassment or whatever. But this other lady, what's her name? Christy? Two things can be true. I can have two feelings at once. I can feel bad for her that she had to go through that. And I can also question her actions and behaviors in the years since and how she has handled the fallout of it. I'm not saying she should have sued anybody, but it wasn't until investigation discovery came around knocking on your door. It wasn't until it was going to be a 4-part docuseries where it actually, in my estimation, from my point of view, allows you to absolve yourself from any accountability, any transparency or accountability until right now. I don't know. It's giving scapegoat. It's giving, we all knew what was going on and chose not only to not help these children, not only to not help ourselves, but not come out in support of them in the years since. One of them even called Amanda Bynes' parents good parents. I'm sorry, there's no good parent, in my opinion, who's letting their child do that. Which brings me to my third little section, and that is the parents of these children. So through the parents and through their retelling of the events, we kind of get a good sense of how they deal with the parents. And you actually get a good idea of how maybe some less sophisticated, maybe some more naive parents might have fallen into a trap, at least to some extent early on, this groupthink type of situation. It reminds me of the thing where it's like those group psychological experiments where it's like every time you hear a sound, there's like actors in a room and like 10 actors and one not actor. And every time they hear this bell go off, they stand up. And then they hear another sound and they sit down. And after a while, most people who are the non-actor will just start doing it too because they feel like, oh, I guess that's what I'm supposed to do. When I hear the parents, it's kind of like an insidious version of that, where it's like in a perfect world, you would be street smart as a parent. You wouldn't let your kid go alone in a room with anybody for any reason. And we do get one of the parents who is like that. That's Drake Bell's father. But you kind of get 3 different reactions from parents. In the docuseries, you get this formula of basically how the show and how the producers and stuff would handle the parents. A lot of times the parents were not allowed in the rooms when the kids were doing their acting and stuff like that. They would go to the green room. A lot of times, they would have the kids coached separately at a different place, different house, different studio, whatever the case may be. And they would kind of keep a lot of the most untoward behaviors hidden from the parents. But when a parent, as we see in this docuseries, would come out and start to push back, start to become a squeaky wheel, there was a number of ways that those parents were dealt with, depending on the level of importance, basically, that these children had to the showrunners. So there's basically 3 tracks that the parents would take. The parents would either do something about it, do nothing about it, and completely ignore it, or in the worst case scenarios, participate and enable the abusive behaviors toward the children. I mean, this is what I saw on the documentary. Go watch it yourself. So first, I think the gold standard is Drake Bell's dad, at least the way he puts it. I mean, I don't know if we could take the man for his word, but Drake also corroborates the dad's story, which is basically this guy, Brian Peck, who actually did indeed, in fact, end up abusing Drake Bell, according to his prison sentence. This guy, Brian Peck, he was getting a little too handsy with Drake, and the dad noticed it. Drake's dad, he wouldn't go to the green room, according to Drake's dad. He would stay on set. He would be right off set, making sure he could see what was going on. He went and reported it. He did report it, which I think is a big deal to the producers or to the higher ups, the executives of the show. He went and he said, it's very weird that this man is always around my son, and I don't want him around my son. Well, what the show ended up doing, the showrunners, Brian Peck in particular, is he started to drive a wedge between Drake and his dad. Basically, he was like, your dad's trying to steal your money. Nobody likes that your dad's on set. He's messing up your career. You're not going to get any jobs if your dad's on set all the time like this. So basically, he ends up driving a wedge between Drake and his father. And the parents were already, I think, not together. They were divorced. So one thing leads to another, and Drake ends up moving in with his mom. And the dad's kind of kicked out of the loop. Right before the dad was kicked out of the loop, he said, just promise me to the mom, please don't ever let Drake be alone with this Brian Peck character. And, one thing leads to another. And of course, he is left alone with him and he is abused. So we also see another way that these parents are dealt with. In Drake Bell's situation, it was easy to drive a wedge between the parent and the child, just go with the other parent who allows the abuse to continue, et cetera, et cetera. But we did also see another parent who did similarly act as sort of a squeaky wheel. And that was Brian Christopher Hearn's mother. She admits that she was a little bit more suspicious of all this stuff going on in the situation. She didn't really like how the hands of the directors would linger just a little too long. She was not letting them do any and every damn thing to her child. If they were doing something seemed racist, she would say it, etc. And that resulted in Brian basically losing his job, his spot on the show. And Brian and his mother both speculate that a big reason why he was not invited to come back onto the show, I think he was on All That, is because of the mother being a sort of squeaky wheel and standing up for the safety of her child. And it caused a huge wedge between the relationship of the child and his mother at the time. And I'm really not sure. I mean, it seems like maybe they have made up since then or whatever, but that was another situation where the mother was trying to protect her child, and there was actually consequences, and we did see the consequences play out. That being said, it shows that it is possible to put your foot down as a parent, even if it means your child's going to be upset with you, even if it means that they're not going to get their desperate desire to be in Hollywood. It might be better that they're not going to be being abused as well, or humiliated or tortured. Then we get a story of a woman who went the other route. Instead of really proactively doing anything to protect her child, she did nothing at all. And that is the woman who was the mother to a girl named, I think her name is Brandy. Brandy was like a extra or something on the Amanda show, but she was, again, desperate to be on these shows and stuff like that. This woman also has a little interesting of a backstory because she's from a Hollywood family. Her mother was in Hollywood. Her grandparents were in Hollywood, like actors or whatever. And then she wasn't allowed to be in. But as soon as she had a kid, she went ahead and put her kid in Hollywood. And that was this Brandy child. Again, she was like an extra or something. She wasn't like a major character, but she was, an extra or whatever. Well, there was this one like producer or something on the show that ended up being arrested and I think served time for child abuse, we'll say, put it that way. And that particular guy had emailed this child actor, Brandy, and emailed a picture of himself engaged in a particular act and, sent her an email like, I wanted you to see this or something like that, or how excited you make me, or I don't know, something like that. And the child freaked out. She got up, she started crying, she ran out of the room, she slammed her door, and the mom came in and saw what the image of the email was and all that. And she's sitting there in the interview and she's contemplating. She's like, well, I didn't know if I should call the cops or not. And I just thought that if they called the cops, then the cops would just think I was such a bad parent for letting her even be around him or go near him. So I decided I couldn't call the cops, but the next best thing I could do was get my child as far away from him as possible. Uh, I'm supposed to feel sorry for you? I'm supposed to feel sympathy for you? The reason you didn't call the police on a child abuser who you had evidence of abusing your child was because they might think you were a bad parent? What in the upside down clown circus is that shit? She was so worried about her own reputation that she failed to protect her child. And come to find out, that man did it to other kids and he ended up getting arrested. And he had a bunch of media of children. She could have made a report. She could have called and said something to the police, and she didn't because she didn't want them to think she was a bad parent. So instead, she actually was a bad parent instead. And I don't think the cops would have probably even maybe done anything at first. And I do understand if she would have said something like, I didn't think the cops were going to do anything because these are powerful men. And I wasn't putting my baby through all of that interrogation and every other thing else, having to relive it. That would have been different. That ain't what she said. She had the opportunity to say any reason she wanted, including the truth. And she said, I didn't want the cops to think I was a bad parent. Sick. In my opinion, that's just speculation. I think she was covering up for him because she's in Hollywood and she knew. I have no reason to believe she's lying, so who knows? Then you have a third batch of parents that seem to have actively participated in the formulation of these characters and all of that. And that's Amanda Bynes' dad. There's photos and pictures and stuff in this docuseries of Amanda Bynes' dad being in the back rooms with, Dan and the producers and all of that. And he was kind of working with it. It seems to me he really knew everything was going on. And then whenever Amanda Bynes started to struggle, where was that father? Putting her in a conservatorship. James Parnell Spears. Yes, working with the mom to put her in a conservatorship. And this Christy Stratton, who got leaned over the table and did all that by her own free will as a consenting adult. As an adult, she did that. As an adult, she knew they were writing about taints and feet and squirting on faces and everything and did nothing. All these years passed, convictions happen, lawsuits, jail sentences, all of that happens. I haven't heard a damn peep from Christy. Amanda Bynes is struggling. Amanda Bynes is strung out from here to there and everywhere. These kids are coming out saying things happen to them. Alexa Nicholas, Leon Frears, all these people. I haven't heard a peep out of Christy Stratton. What's her name? Stratton. I haven't heard a peep. But we're supposed to feel sorry for her. And I do. I do feel bad for her. It's not that I don't have sympathy for what she went through. It's that she doesn't seem to have sympathy for the children. And it could be some selective editing, right? They could have sat there for 10 hours and could have been spent 7 hours on feeling bad for the kids. I will leave that possibility open. But I haven't seen her on an interview. I haven't seen her on a YouTube channel. I haven't seen her comment in any comments of support. Only thing I've seen her do is boo-hoo about the things she went through.
Working for Dan was like being in an abusive relationship.
And make excuses as to why she shouldn't be held responsible. Which brings me to the main conclusion of this video. I do think it was a good documentary. Overall, I actually highly suggest y'all go watch it. It's very good. I'm very thankful and appreciative that some of these child stars have finally had the opportunity on a very large platform without having to build one themselves to talk about what happened to them. To tell the truth, to tell their truth, to tell their side. I'm happy about it. I think the documentary was edited well. I think that it had a good pace. I think it was produced well. I like the documentary, and I really don't have anything bad to say about the documentary, other than some of the participants of the documentary almost kind of try to garner the same amount of sympathy from the audience as if they were the children who were being abused in this case. The children were the product. And ended up being, all these writers said it in one way or another, you're replaceable. Dan Schneider can fire you today. That's not the case for a Drake Bell. That's not the case for an Amanda Bynes. Yeah, they can wind your season down. They can retaliate against you. They can make sure you don't work in Hollywood again. They can do some stuff. But When a writer leaves, the show goes on. That was one of Dan's major points throughout the whole thing. You're replaceable. The whole operation don't need you to run. You can do this or you can leave. And these people stayed around. They stuck around. They knew what was going on and they stayed around. They weren't helping these children. They didn't say they were. I didn't hear them say they were. I only heard Christy Stratton talking about how she knew it was weird what Dan was doing, and these massages were weird and illegal, and it was all strange, but she stayed until she was fired. So she had to go back to temping anyway. Then the other lady, she did finally quit. But then you have these other guys that are like, a child was abused?
It wasn't dealing with anybody on the shows or anything, right?
It was a child actor.
On one of our shows.
Yes.
On one of our shows? Please. Like you didn't know about that freaking lawsuit. You didn't know about the criminal charges. You didn't know Brian Peck got removed from your show. Please. I might have been born at night. It was not last night. I feel like the people who participated in this documentary dogpiled on Dan Schneider and Brian Peck because their reputations are already tarnished and ruined in order to absolve themselves with the public and with their conscience over what they know they allowed to happen, over what they participated in, over what they turned a blind eye to. How is it that lowly little writers who weren't even making half the salary of the men on the show, they saw stuff going on that was wrong? How is it a random dad who was forcibly being kept off the show saw what was going on? Drake Bell said that his girlfriend's mother even pieced it together after Brian Peck wouldn't stop blowing up her house phone. All these people pieced it together. And you expect me to believe that this bald-headed worm, I will put a picture of him up. You expect me to believe you didn't have an inkling? You didn't see Brian Peck for no reason at all, just hanging around, swarming around Drake Bell? You didn't see it? You didn't have a hunch? You're shocked? And the thing is, he couldn't even do a shocked face. Look at this face. Look at this reaction. We'll put the video right here. It's from the trailer.
It wasn't dealing with anybody on the shows or anything, right?
It was a child actor.
On one of our shows.
Yes.
One of our shows. I don't know what his job was on set, but I hope it wasn't teaching kids how to act, because this is not a believable or convincing performance by this guy, this bald-headed worm.
On one of our shows.
Yes.
One of our shows? Yeah, one of your shows. You didn't notice? If you didn't notice, then you damn sure shouldn't have been working with kids. But I have reason to believe that you did notice. And I think a lot of this documentary participation was a way to kind of absolve themselves from the guilt, from the knowing participation, in my opinion. Is that the same thing as saying they were just as guilty as Dan Schneider and Brian Peck? No. But there's something to be said for an enabler. Amanda Bynes' dad, backstage with Dan, knowing about this, all of this, seeing it up front, Penelope Taint, and then the rest. That's an enabler. He should have been protecting his child like Drake Bell's father was trying to. So the big takeaway for me from the documentary, other than just really seeing the point driven home even further at how pervasive and prevalent just this culture of just disgusting mess, nasty stunts and stuff and all that. Other than that, driving home more examples of that I had either forgotten about or not seen. The main takeaway for me is a little bit outrage, because there's these grown people who willingly consented to do a lot of this stuff, almost kind of being presenting themselves as if they are equally victims as the children whose parents might have signed those contracts on their behalf, whose parents in a lot of these cases didn't seem to really have their children's best interest at heart and in mind and at play. It's not the same. And I feel a lot more sympathy for the children who frontal lobes weren't even damn developed yet, who couldn't even legally enter into a contract, being put out here, worked to death, worked to the bone as children, their innocence stolen from them, their childhood stolen from them, some of them actually overtly sexually abused by these people who were put in parental type roles over their lives, being harassed and stalked by these people, being followed, can't get away from them. It's not the same as somebody who just don't want to go back to temping. It's not the same. And again, I really want to reiterate that I do feel sympathy for her. It's not that I don't feel sympathy, but it's not the same. And I just want to make sure that we're using the appropriate amount of nuance here, that the real primary victims are the products, the kids who knew the show could not go on without them. Imagine you're Amanda Bynes. There's the Amanda show. The show can't go on without you. You're Drake Bell. This is Drake and Josh. The show can't go on without you. And what I will say is one final thing. Drake Bell has been accused of some similar behaviors himself. I've not really looked into them, but from what I remember or from what I think happened is he actually like either settled or admitted or pled guilty to some stuff or something. Like, I'm not defending that behavior. I'm not defending that behavior. It's the same type of nuance that I have to use with this Christie lady and the same type of nuance that I use for the Nick Carter situation. You can have been abused as a child and people can feel bad for that. And then you could have turned around and perpetuated similar forms of that abuse. I don't feel sorry for that. I think you should be held accountable for that. I think he should be held accountable for that. And whatever that looks like is what that looks like. But I do think it's interesting that it seems to me like Drake Bell has faced more accountability for these types of actions than Dan Schneider ever did. Now, to be clear, Drake says Dan Schneider never did treat him in this abusive way. And in fact, Dan supported him whenever he came out against Brian Peck, which could be true, but that doesn't take away what Dan, again, did to other kids, according to these other kids. I think it's interesting the documentary pointed out that Dan Schneider was not let go from Nickelodeon for his abuses against children or his alleged abuses against children. He was let go or parted ways with Nickelodeon because of the hostile work environment against the Christie Stafford Strattons or whatever, and the writers and things like that, the women and all of that, which is a good reason to let him go. It's, Me Too times up all that. But we got Jeanette McCurdy, Alexa Nicholas, Leon, for like all these kids coming out and saying, this type of stuff happened to me at the hands of Dan Schneider, and I don't see any investigations that have happened in a legal sense. Oh, there was one more thing about Nickelodeon. Basically, in my opinion, they put in a little bit of a plausible deniability for themselves with this Penelope Taint thing. Because somebody was retelling the story of the Penelope Taint, and they were saying, oh yeah, like we all knew it. And then Nickelodeon representatives came in and were like, isn't that like a private part? Like, isn't that the name of whatever? And Dan Schneider was like, no, it means, you tainted it or whatever. Right. So Nickelodeon's like, oh, okay, cool. Like, go ahead then. And the woman who is retelling this story is like, that's power. That's when I realized that's power. Yeah, true. That's power. But also, doesn't that give Nickelodeon just such a nice little plausible deniability out of it? Oh, we checked and he lied. No, you don't get off that scot-free with me, buddy. You knew what taint meant. And you had the opportunity to say, change her name. No, even though that's not what you meant, it's too ambiguous and it's kind of gross to be, it's kind of like making you think about sex and as a kid and it's nasty. So no, they knew it. It doesn't clear them or absolve them, in my opinion. It actually makes them more guilty, more enabling at the very least, because they knew and they called it out to Dan Schneider and they went with his bullshit gaslighting explanation. Oh, it means tainted. They not off the hook with me. They not off the hook with me. They kept playing this little thing about, oh, Nickelodeon does internal investigations. Well, you should have did a little bit harder of an investigation because you didn't sniff out Brian Peck, did you? You didn't get him. It took the law getting him. It's sick. It's disgusting. And one thing that the producer says is like, I don't think any one person is responsible. I think the system needs to examine what it's doing to protect children. No, fault. No, disagree. No, I disagree. Because when you say the system needs to examine what it needs to do to protect children, you're absolving every perpetrator. The system is not Brian Peck. That was the individual. The system is not Dan Schneider. That was an individual. The system is not the president of Nickelodeon. That is an individual. No, the system. What in the hell is that going to do? I think as a solution, again, I like this documentary and I think the director did a good job and all that. I'm not trying to really, I'm not trying to be mean or drag her or whatever, but this is children we're talking about. So I feel like I'm allowed to have a little bit of a strong opinion. We don't need to examine the system. Who in the hell does that help? Who's the system? Who are we going to go investigate if we're investigating the system, ma'am? No. We need to investigate individuals who have been named, who have been caught on camera, putting their hands on children, making little children say boob and taint, making little children get inside beds with sheets on them and have the camera in the face. That's who we need to, who are the names? Naming the names. That's who needs to be examined. We need to examine the system. That's going to get us jack nowhere. That's going to get us right back to 360 where we are today, which is nobody held accountable. Oh, it's just the system. Yeah, sure. Obviously, I'm not stupid. The system does operate to the advantage of pedophiles. I'm not stupid. But if you're trying to actually fix something, I don't think the way is the system needs to examine itself. This is not a quantum theory class. This is child abuse. The system needs to examine itself. No. If you're asking me what needs to happen, Christy Stratton needs to be sat down and interrogated. All these people that were writing on this show need to be. There needs to be some accountability. There needs to be some consequences for putting your own desperation to be a part of the sick machine that is Hollywood above the safety of children. And I'm not even holding it against her for not doing nothing in the moment. You know what I mean? I wish she would have. But it's been about 20 years been past what she did since. She showed up on a documentary to absolve herself. She don't seem sorry about it. She never once said, yeah, I wrote some jokes that I feel disgusted by. He forced me to write jokes about little girls talking. No, none of these people admit to doing anything wrong. None of them. You know, the only people admitted to doing anything wrong or perceiving themselves to have done anything. What's his name? Brian Hearn's mother. She still to this day feels bad for hurting her son by interfering with his child star career. But she did it because she loved him and she was trying to protect him. She shows a little remorse. Drake Bell's dad, he did everything he could have possibly done. He got iced out. He feels remorse. He says still to this day, he cries, he thinks about it. It feels just that same pain as the first time he ever felt it. So if they can say where they could have done something different or where they wish they would have or where they, there's nuance to everything. Christy Stratton didn't say that she did one wrong thing. Everything they talked about was Dan Schneider abusing them, which I do, again, think is important. I do think they should tell the stories. I do feel sympathy for them. But what about your participation in the whole thing? You wrote scripts on the show where they were putting this stuff in kids' face, where they were having them suck their own toes, where they were calling things taints and boobs and things. You sorry? You regret it? Do you even think there was anything wrong with it? I didn't hear anybody saying anything like that. And I would like to see it, actually. Again, thank you so much to the children at the time, who are now adults, who are coming back to rescue their own damn selves. Because clearly the adults in the room weren't going to do it then and have no interest in doing it today. That's all I had for today. In the meantime, facts ain't defamation. Love you, mean it. Okay, bye.